Hello, everyone. Frederica, Zis Pesach.
Same to you, Michael. Thank you.
Ray is preparing our meal in the kitchen as we're talking for Friday night. So there may be some background noise.
Sure, Carter is here catching his breath. We'll give it another minute and hope for a couple more committee members and the public. All right, we have a nice quorum here. Good afternoon, everybody. Good evening. Welcome to the April meeting of Manhattan's Community Board 2 Land Use and Housing Committee. My name is Frederica Siegel. I'm the chair of the committee, and I'd like to introduce the committee members. Eugene Yu is vice chair. We have Katie Bordenaro, Anita Brandt, John Paul Taverna, David Gruber, Michael Levine, Donna Raftery, Susan Wittenberg, and public member Sean Sweeney. And I see that Janine Kiley, our chair, our board chair, is here, as is Carter Booth, our previous chair. The topic of tonight's meeting is Bill number A9675, It's an act to amend the multiple dwelling law in relation to occupancy of joint living work quarters for artists. The purpose of the bill is to permit residents who live in JLWQA units, and we're doing so prior to December 31st, 2021, to continue to occupy such units regardless of their status as certified artists. The bill was introduced to the State Assembly by Assemblymember Deborah Glick on March 28th. And here to speak to us about it from her office are Charlie Anderson, her Director of Community Affairs. Hey, Charlie. And Charles LeDuc, her Legislative Director. Hi, Charles. This is how the meeting will run. Charlie and Charles will make a presentation regarding specifically the intent and the process of the bill. And our Land Use Committee will follow up with questions. We hope to take questions from the public specifically about the bill, and we'll put a 2-minute limit because of the number of people who signed up, who registered for the meeting. I don't know how many people specifically want to speak. At the conclusion of that portion of the meeting, the committee will go into a business session, and CB2 protocol is for members of the committee to speak only at that time to each other. So if anybody from the public has something to say, please do it in response to the presentation. So Charlie, Charles, welcome. We know this is very preliminary, so thank you for coming. And many thanks to Assemblymember Glick for taking the initiative on this important community concern. So would you like to just speak? Is there screen sharing? How would you like it to work?
Thank you. Yeah, good evening, Frederica and the committee. Thank you so much for having us. What we will do is we're not going to share our screen. We don't have a presentation necessarily that is a PowerPoint. What I'll do is I will put a link to the bill in the chat so that folks can have that readily available this evening. But before we do that, let me just introduce myself again. I'm Charlie Anderson. I'm the Director of Community Affairs for Assemblymember Deborah Glick. I'm joined by my colleague, Charles LeDuc, who is the Assemblymember's Legislative Director. What we will do is in a moment, I'm going to turn this over to Charles, who is going to give us all a rundown, a description of the bill, its intent, and also talk a little bit about the legislative process. And from there, we'll try to answer some questions, as Frederica said. I'd like to reiterate, just so that folks understand, is that we're happy to talk about the bill itself. It's a little difficult for me to always answer, or for us to answer, questions that are maybe related to the ULURP, though we know that that is a part of this conversation. So I will put that bill here in the chat in a second, but without further ado, I'll turn this over to Charles, who will speak on this bill.
Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. Thanks for having us. We're glad to be here to be speaking about this bill. I thought, since it's a very short bill, and I'm sure that most of us have taken a look at it at this point, but I would just read it very quickly. It's only about 2 or 3 sentences. So the bill states, for units in manufacturing buildings converted to joint living work quarters for artist units, whether having a temporary or permanent certificate of occupancy, or that have applied for a joint living work quarters for artist certificate of occupancy prior to December 31st, 2021, and where the local zoning text has changed to allow for residential use as of right, residential occupancy of such joint living work quarters for artist units shall be permitted without requiring that a certified artist occupy such unit. So not a lot there, but we pack a lot with a few words. To put this into context, this bill amends Article 7B of the multiple dwelling law, not to be confused with Article 7C, which is colloquially called the loft law. This is a loft law, but it is not the loft law. There are 2 parallel avenues one can take. This 7B is intended only for joint living work quarters for artists. So this bill inserts that language into Section 277 of 7B. And 277 lays out the requirements that are specific to the JLWQA lofts. So this is air and light requirements, fire safety requirements, and the like, that are added requirements for these units because of their special circumstance. So the intent of the bill is to ensure that current residents of Soho and NoHo are not displaced as a byproduct of the recent zoning changes. The bill accomplishes this by allowing residents of JLWQA units to legally reside there, regardless of their status as a certified artist. The urgency of this change was increased with the introduction and City Council passage of legislation that would have drastically increased penalties on non-conforming JLWQA residents. Predating the zoning process, the Department of Cultural Affairs, which is tasked with certifying artists, that process had slowed to a crawl. And our office had heard from many people who found DCA to be either unresponsive or overly restrictive with their rulings on who could be considered a certified artist, or had simply not even tried due to what they have heard from other folks or looking at the daunting application process. Now with the entire artist certification process in uncertainty, it was important to address this issue as quickly as possible. So that's a very brief outline of the bill. I thought I would share a little bit of the process as we see it moving forward. So as was stated at the beginning of the meeting, this is a brand new bill. It was introduced on March 28th in the midst of getting the budget done. So it really feels like yesterday to us. The very first part of the process, and most of you, if not all of you, are going to be familiar with the fact that we need to secure a Senate sponsor. Right now, it's a one-house bill. It's only in the Assembly, but we're confident that within the coming days or weeks, we will have a Senate sponsor secured, which greatly increases the speed in which things can get done. A lot of the time, folks are hesitant to really give the time to a one-house bill, but we're certain we'll have a two-house bill very soon. The next part of that process is we have to get it through the committee. So it's been sent to the Housing Committee. Unsurprisingly, we would assume it would be sent to the Housing Committee in the Senate as well. So we will have to work with the chair of the Senate Assembly Housing Committee to get it passed. We are at April 13th. Session ends June 2nd. That's the stated end date. So we do have a good opportunity if we work very hard to get this done. There's a lot of work ahead of us, of course, but this is a priority. So we're going to try to get it through committee and onto the floor before June 1st. So once that happens, we get the bills passed. And then it's up to us to speak with the governor, and that's us collectively here. It's very important for the governor to hear on issues of local importance that the community is supportive. So that's why we're glad to be here to hear from you folks, to get your input. So when we do get to that process, we can let the governor know that the community is behind this issue. So before we open it up to comments, I wanted to address a question that was brought up by the chair before we get started. And that was, the bill seems to focus on units rather than residents. And why would we decide to focus on units rather than residents? So the very simple answer is that we tied it to units to protect the residents in there. And I know it's more complicated than that, but this we see as a very first step in a very complex issue that's going to require more than just one bill. So we wanted to act swiftly to address the immediate concern of potential displacement of community members. Make sure that people aren't displaced or intimidated and so forth. We're also concerned with the small number of certified artists that have been certified by DCA. We would need to work with our partners in the city to address this, to reinvigorate the application process that had already been slowed down drastically before we had even gotten to this point. We believe it would be difficult to keep JLWQA units around without artists continuously being certified. When we introduced the bill, we were focused mainly on helping community members who have no avenue now to move into compliance to remain in their homes. So we decided to take this route for the reasons that I just laid out, but we're looking forward to hearing from you all and answering your questions, hearing your comments, making any adjustments if any are needed, and working with our city partners on next steps, because this is a complex issue that's going to require more action than just one bill. We see this as a good first step. So with that, unless Charlie, you think I left something out?
No, you didn't. What I was going to just follow up with that is say as well is that I know folks may have questions going forward as well, and a lot of the committee members, I know you know me. I'll put my contact information in the chat, and people are more than welcome to contact me or our office as we move forward in this process.
Okay, I want just to mention that Tevin Williams is here from State Senator Holman's office and Ian Wang from Chris Marte's office. Thank you very much, Charles. I've been collecting questions that people have sent in to me, and I thought that before we hear from the committee and before we hear from the public, it might be helpful to everyone to hear some of the most common questions. So let me just start with the basic. Was that what the text that you read, was that the same text that was in the original bill, or did it change slightly?
The text that I just read at the beginning of my presentation, that's the same language that we introduced on the 28th.
Okay. And the first question that I had was, what is the process for adding specifics to this bill? So when you say it's a multi-bill process, maybe you can just go into some detail about that.
So I think this bill stands on its own. I think, like I said, we saw an immediate issue that we wanted to address as quickly as possible. What I meant by that was the process of rezoning had opened up a lot of issues for folks. This isn't going to solve everything that people are concerned about in that process. So that's what I meant. If we're always open to amending bills. That's part of why we're happy to be here, to hear, if there's any concerns that folks have. But my comment about more action being taken was in line with the fact that this is one specific issue that was raised that we thought needed to be addressed quickly. There are others, such as the definition of artist and myriad other issues regarding the zoning process.
Right, and what part does the state, would Deborah take with respect to the certification process and also maybe updating the definition of artist?
Yeah, there's been a lot of back and forth on this. So there is a section of law, it's section 276, I believe, of 7B of the multiple dwelling law, that lays out a very vague sketch of what could be in a definition of an artist. And then it leaves it up to the city to fill in those gaps. I think it's a sentence, maybe it's 2 sentences. And it's our belief that that vague sketch has been, the Department of Cultural Affairs has taken a very expansive view on interpreting that sentence or 2. There's nothing in the state law that requires, for example, people to submit gallery reviews to prove that they are an artist. That was up to the department to determine based on a sketch of what a definition of artist could be that's in state law. So I don't know if I actually got around to answering your question. I think that was a long preamble. So we could take a look at that. We believe that we would need to work with our city partners, though, to ensure that if that's something that an avenue we wanted to go down, that perhaps, and this is all up in the air right now, that perhaps, like, for example, there's a local law that clarifies, what goes into a specific application.
I thought my recollection was that Deborah had expressed some frustration that we hadn't gotten, that she hadn't been brought into that process so that things could be reinvigorated and perhaps redefined. So does this bill cover, understanding that the bill covers units, is it in perpetuity?
Correct.
Okay. Will the bill preserve the rights and spaces of working artists and support the true artist live work precedent in these neighborhoods, or will it deplete the inventory of live work spaces for artists?
Well, that's a difficult question to answer. I guess that's up to interpretation. I think that this bill doesn't do anything to endanger working artists that are in their spaces. In fact, I think the concern, getting back to other avenues to work, with the slowdown of certifying artists, there's a concern that if folks aren't compliant with being a certified artist, and that's a hard and fast rule, that we could see these live workspaces disappear.
Okay, so it all depends on the certification process to keep them in the pipeline. What are the ramifications for renters and rent stabilized tenants of joint live work units? Will rent stabilized units continue to be rent stabilized?
This bill doesn't make any changes to that. It's very specifically just about the status of being a certified artist or not. It doesn't change any other aspect of the law.
Okay. How will safety and emergency requirements such as light and air, emergency exiting, and floor-to-floor access be handled?
Again, the same answer. The section 277 that lays all of those requirements out for JLWQA units is unchanged. All we're doing is adding the 16th paragraph to the previous 15 and not changing any of the other requirements.
Okay. How will the difference in code requirements between joint live work and residential units be handled? Does this mean the whole building must be brought up to code in order to qualify?
I'm not perfectly certain about that. I'm not perfectly certain about how the requirements would differ for the residential units, but I can say that, and I feel like a broken record now, that once again, this doesn't change any of the current requirements for these units.
Frederica, we can look into that further and we'll make sure that we get the board an answer.
Okay, and I'll spare you the repetition. The covering the cost of conversion, landlord or tenant, that would stay unchanged also?
Correct. This would make that conversion optional.
Okay, optional. And lastly, from the questions that were sent in to me, how does this affect the art fund?
I would have to think. I don't think it would affect the arts fund. The only effect that it would have would be that you wouldn't have to pay into it because you wouldn't be required to make that conversion. Charlie, do I have that right?
Yeah, we're not changing anything that was necessarily ratified in that ULURP, other than trying to correct this one specific portion. So some of those, but again, that's a limit based on the state. The state has that's a purely city process.
Okay, I'm looking at a few questions from the chat. Since the proposed bill is to certify the units, not the owners of the units, why is artist certification an issue? But I think you answered that. Do you want to?
Yeah, so like I said, there's many different ways to look at this issue. And this is one. We're certainly open to looking at artist certification as a next step.
Okay. Go to the committee now, Michael.
Yes, thank you for the presentation and the brevity of the explanation, but I am confused about one thing. I thought I heard Charlie say in the introduction something about a ULURP process I may have misunderstood. So this is the first of two questions I have. If I'm correct, there is no ULURP process involved at all. This is purely state legislation. Am I correct?
Yes.
Now, in the future, after the cutoff date of December 31st, any new occupancy of a loft building in the area by anyone would still require an artist certification under state law. Is that correct?
I believe so, if I heard your question correctly. So any unit that gets a C of O after 12/31/21, you're saying?
Yes.
Right.
Would still need an artist certification following the definition in the zoning resolution, right?
Correct.
So is there any attempt or any desire on your part to work with the Department of City Planning and the City Planning Commission to amend the portion of the zoning resolution articles, the use group 17D, that refers to the definition of joint living work quarters for artists? Or do you feel that what you're doing here is enough at the present time?
I mean, that's something that we could consider. I think that we feel that we've staked out a good position with this bill, but you bring up an alternative that we can ponder.
Well, it's not an alternative. It would be a next step. If you felt, and if the committee felt and the community felt as though it was appropriate, it might be something to consider for the future.
Yep. We're always open to hearing that.
But again, that would be city legislation, not state legislation.
We absolutely need to work with our partners. Certainly, there's only so many things we can do, but you're absolutely right.
Okay.
And Michael, if I may also say, I know that the board is considering, I believe the board is considering, or this committee is considering doing a resolution. More specific items like that can certainly be outlined there, and that kind of gives us a direct or gives us suggestions as well as the city council members.
Good. Thank you very much. We will consider that.
But there's one question in the chat. So non-certified co-op owners would have to pay $100 per square foot to become legal?
Could you repeat the question?
Would non-certified co-op owners have to pay the $100 per square foot into the art fund to become legal?
I'm not sure of the interplay here with co-ops, to be honest. So we'd have to look back on that, unless Charlie, you have an answer.
I don't have a specific answer right now. Let me make a note of that, and we will certainly try to find an answer to get back to the board. I know there's always been a question regarding co-ops. Let us get back to you.
Okay, good. Let me just scan here for a second, then I'll get to the two people who have their hands up. How does your bill impact heirs of artists in residence being able to remain in possession of the units?
We can double check on that, but I don't believe that this addresses that in any way.
Okay. So there's a lot of questions here. So I'll go back to the first question. If we want to, if you want us to do a reso, then what I think we should do during the course of our business meeting is to gather our questions and take them from the chat as well, and then incorporate them into the resolution so that you see what the concerns are and what needs to be addressed. But there's nothing substantive that's going to be added to this bill at this time?
We don't have plans of amending it, but we're always open to hearing from folks. So, we don't have like an amendment in our back pocket that we're waiting to introduce, but
okay.
We're all ears.
All right, fine. Sean?
Yeah, hi. It was brought up earlier that there was no Senate sponsor. I hope I'm not speaking out of turn, but Brian Kavanaugh called me about 5 minutes before the meeting, and he said he would sponsor it in the Senate.
Oh, that's fantastic news. That's wonderful.
Yeah, I thought that should be revealed at this meeting.
Okay.
Thank you, Sean.
Thanks, Sean. Emily was supposed to be here, but she's not feeling well. Bo.
Yeah, hi. Charles, you mentioned the difficulty of getting the bill through and the hard work that would be necessary. And I'm assuming that's just because of the vagaries of the normal legislative process in Albany, because I don't think that this bill would have any natural enemies, would it? I mean, you know, for instance, taxi drivers versus taxi owners or landlords versus tenants or something. I don't see any natural enemies to this bill, but correct me if I'm wrong.
No, I think you're right. With two caveats, I'll say, Bo. Once we have a Senate sponsor, any enemies in hiding will emerge. People tend to wait until a bill is showing momentum. You know, why waste the time opposing a bill that doesn't look like it's going anywhere? And the second caveat is time is the biggest enemy. You know, the committees meet, they don't meet every single week. And we're in the middle of April with session ending in the beginning of June. It's just a matter of, once we have a two-house bill, getting the folks in the committee to get their eyes on it when every other member is asking them to do the same. You know, we're pros at doing that. So I feel confident we can do that. So I think you're correct. We'll see if anybody comes out in opposition once we get some momentum. But aside from that, we just, it's a race with the session calendar.
Thank you.
Okay, let's move to the public. If the committee is has asked all the questions, anybody else? Okay, Adam Lipson, permitted to speak. Please unmute yourself. Adam, unmute yourself.
You hear me now?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
You know, it seems like there are a lot of really good questions here. Like, what happens if, say, a surviving spouse of an artist is in a unit, or you know,
Adam, just to point out, there's a 2-minute limit that we have, and we have a timer. Do you think we'll need it on you?
I would hope not, but thanks for warning me. I won't do it. I won't do a Will Smith. I promise you.
Okay.
Okay. If there are all these nuanced questions, like what happens if a surviving spouse of an artist, or what happens if you know, if someone sells a unit, it seems like we're kicking the can down the road with this sort of solution. And really, it's all the ambiguity in the language. It would seem to me that the best way to fix this problem is simply take, if you really want to fix it and not have this problem crop up again in another 10 years, why wouldn't we just take all of the live workspaces and simply make them residential? And then the only problem with that is buildings would now need to comply with new zoning requirements, or building codes, but if the building code is presumably in there for a reason, safety. So, you know, I would rather see a more comprehensive piece of legislation that really fixes the problem rather than kicks the can down the road. I've used 40 seconds and I'm done. Can we do that? Is that a better sort of legislation rather than kicking the can down the road?
You know, I don't think we're kicking the can down the road with this, but we're making the conversion optional, essentially. And that would be tied to the unit. So the issue for the unit wouldn't reappear in 10 years' time.
But it might reappear in other forms, like on a surviving spouse, or, you know, I bought this 2 generations ago, or I inherited this unit from my mother who was an artist, and I didn't anticipate having a 1,200 square foot and suddenly have a $120,000 conversion fee bill from the city of New York. And the answer is yes, condos and co-ops will be subject to the $100 a square foot fines. So, you know, yes, that it could come up repeatedly, because the ambiguity is in the lack of the sweepingness of the legislation. I think it's a good piece of legislation, don't get me wrong, but it doesn't, in some form, it kicks the can down the road a bit.
Well, that is certainly something that we can take back and we can talk about internally. I think Charles mentioned earlier that, you know, we don't necessarily see this as, you know, a single bill in some respects, and so that is something to consider. But again, you know, we'll take that under advisement.
And I appreciate your work, by the way.
Thanks.
Ronnie Wolf, unmute yourself, please.
Hi, how are you? And thank you very much for all your efforts. As a certified artist, I just want to say that looking to certify more artists or bring in the certification seems wasteful at this point. I think we should just abolish the need to be certified.
That's unbelievably fucking rude.
Adam Lipson, could you please mute yourself?
And so that's one point I have to make. I don't think we need to play with certification anymore and for people to go through the process and pay the fees and be, judged if they're an artist or not an artist, or broaden the artist's wording. So that's one thing. The other thing is making the conversion optional is very concerning for me. Let's say my upstairs neighbor wants to convert, but I don't. We can't all change our C of Os at different times. And I think that will put pressure on those who do not want to pay the $100 a square foot. In my case, $260,000. For what? I'm totally legal and my building is legal. So I think we need to look at making that optional. And I think it just should be, JLWQ buildings without the A and everybody residential, and not have to change or update our C of Os. Thank you.
Thank you. Something that we can consider, and I think that what you're laying out is something that we want to avoid. So we will consider that.
Thank you. Pete Davies, please unmute yourself.
Hi, yeah, thank you. Thank you, Charlie, and thank you, Charles. And please thank Deborah for taking this really important first step. We're all facing the mess that we were left with by the exiting folks who put this in place. So it's really appreciated that Deborah is taking this on. And one thing I was looking at, and based on what you said in terms of getting support, what can we do, the community, members of the community, to help you do that? Would that be contacting various members on the housing committees at both Senate and Assembly, which I see is Assembly, I see it's Stephen Sibrowitz. I'm not sure how to pronounce his name, but
Sibrowitz.
Okay. Would that be something that would be useful?
Absolutely. Thanks, Pete. Appreciate that question. And you're absolutely right. That would be the next step, is getting it through the committee. So Assembly Member Sibrowitz hearing from folks would be a good thing to do. Once we get there, then it's up to the speaker to schedule the bill for a vote. And then we move to the governor. So yes, the committee is the appropriate first step.
And we'll give you the ammunition you need also. Zella Jones, please unmute yourself.
Yes. Okay, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, I have 4 questions. That's probably being pretty hoggy here, but I'll start with the rent stabilized tenants who are renters in this scenario. A rent stabilized tenant who is in a JLWQA unit is currently the unit is currently obligated to rent to a new artist when they vacate. So if we turn this around and say everybody is legal, then it seems to me, and I'm open to your response on this, it seems to me that we are depleting the number of affordable art spaces that exist in NoHo and Soho. They are not a majority, I will admit that, but any depletion of affordable art creating spaces among renters, to me, of a so I hope I'm a little bit concerned that that your statement that there is no change in the art fund part of this local legislation, because in my opinion, it's exorbitant. In my opinion, and NoHo Bowery stakeholders' opinion, there should be a fund that can perpetuate arts in a variety of forms, whether it's a unit or whether it's a fund that supports artists who are visiting here, who are displaying here, who are putting on performances here. We're talking about current tenants who have ignored the fact that they aren't artists and have inhabited themselves here, and there is no give back to the very nature of the neighborhood that attracted them. I'll put the others in the chat, and you can bring them up, Chairman Siegel, and as you see fit. I don't want to take too much time.
Right. Zella, let's let some other people actually ask questions.
Go for it.
We're always interested in your opinion, but let's move to the people with the questions. Ingrid Weigard, please unmute yourself.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, good. I want to address the business of the gallery approval. You say that the Cultural Affairs says there are no gallery review requirements, but the reason that there are so few artists registered is because the Cultural Affairs requires that you exhibit, and about 10% of artists genuinely exhibit, and never mind getting reviews. And the Cultural Affairs has really stopped most artists from attaining the status because. Hello?
Yes, we're here. The timer isn't working, Ingrid, but we're really looking. This is an opportunity to ask questions about the process and the intent of this bill. And there will be time
about the process, and I think it's very important you know this and deal with it, because otherwise you will just turn away because there are so few artists registered.
Okay, thank you. Let's go to Alexander Naratov. Please unmute yourself.
Yes. This is actually not really a question. I wanted to say that I'm in full support of this bill. I think it solves really the, after the Margaret Chin portion of the law was, or a separate law standing legislation was vetoed, the rezoning really left three big issues, and this deals with probably the least easy aspect of this. And I don't think it pushes anything down the road or doesn't kick the can down the road. It actually deals with the inheritance issue. It deals with the ability to sell. It doesn't say anything about co-ops and condos. It grandfathers the space. So it eliminates all sorts of problems in one very clean, very simple move. And I'm fully supportive of this. Obviously, there's the whole incompatibility problem that between joint living work quarters and residential units. That should be addressed separately on a city level, mainly and partly on a state level. But that's a separate legislation that doesn't have to complicate this one, because the other issues are very, very complicated and have to be dealt with. There's also the eviction by demolition issue, which this does not address. That should be a separate legislation, but I'm just expressing my support for this bill. Thank you.
Thank you. Francesca Rhiannon, please unmute yourself.
Yes, thank you. So I'm a bit confused. My mother was an artist, Frances Olenikoff, one of the first AIR buildings, and her estate, of which I'm an executor, inherited it after she died. It is a very important. It's very important to us to be able to remain there, myself and my son and my granddaughter. And now I'm confused because one person said it doesn't deal with the inheritance issue, but another person just said that it does. And it just would mean absolute devastation for our family because we simply cannot afford to keep it in any way if we have to pay, $100 per square foot for a 3,000 square foot place.
Okay. Do you want to clarify that for us then about the inheritance, Charles?
Yeah, we will go back and ensure that the intent of what we're trying to do is being fulfilled here. But by tying it to the unit, it's our belief that the units would be able to be inherited by a non-artist.
Great, thank you.
All right, thank you. John Chimples.
Hi. Yeah, my confusion is aligned with that because the way I understood it that if this were passed, conversion could occur and that conversion would be in perpetuity as it pertains to that unit. Is that correct?
No conversion, for Christ's sakes.
Excuse me, could you please?
No, I think we're talking about this bill, not what we'd like to see in other bills, Alexander.
If a unit is converted to residential, then it's converted, but this bill would make that conversion optional.
Right. But so that would preclude any problem with inheritance, as in my mind. That's what that sounded like.
That's our belief.
That's our feeling.
Right. I also had a question of how you come to the conclusion that it wouldn't limit the number of AIR spaces available if, in fact, these units that this bill would cover could be converted to residential. That would take them out of the pool of AIR spaces.
Yeah, we're not getting rid of the possibility that folks can convert. That was done at the city level. We're just making that, we're not forcing people into that conversion.
Right. Okay. And I too would encourage a further bill that would address the issue of the $100 per square foot, which is, in my mind, ridiculous. Thank you.
Is that within the purview of the assembly member?
I don't believe so, Frederica. Charles, if you have an idea about that, but since it is a city, it was a part of the ULURP, we'd have to come back and we can talk to our city partners to try to understand further if that's something, but I assume that is fully a city issue.
I believe so as well. And yes, I believe so as well.
All right, let's move on to Laura Tenenbaum. Laura, would you unmute yourself?
Hi, everybody. I have a couple of questions, and I want to repeat the way I understand the bill to be. I understand that basically what it does is tie grandfathering to the unit rather than the occupants. And because it's tied to the unit, it continues on past the present occupants and on into perpetuity, and basically says that if it is a JLWQA before this particular date, it can always be a JLWQA no matter who is living there. Is that correct?
That's correct, unless somebody goes through with the residential conversion.
Yes, but someone can do that. But this law doesn't prohibit that, but it doesn't address it either. It doesn't address it at all. It's basically saying the situation is that if the owner or if the person in there does not want to to change it to JLWQA, they can sell it to someone who's not a JLWQA to someone who's not an artist and not go through the conversion process
Yes.
if they don't want to. So I think this solves a lot of problems. Because people can choose to do that. And I think it solves a problem for the inheritance issue. I think it solves a problem for artists who cannot find another artist to buy their homes if they're owners of a condo or a co-op. And it certainly solves the problem for people who are currently living there without certification. So it seems to me very good and very, very well thought out. I really commend you on it. I do have a question about the ultimate date. Why not January 1st and not December 31st? Because it seems that you're leaving the last day of December ownership. If someone took ownership on that day, they're not covered.
There's always got to be a line. That's where we drew the line. And if we want to hear from folks who say, if but that day, we're certainly open to hearing that.
Yeah, it just seems to me that it would be full to the full end of the year and not a day short.
This is generally the way we usually go to 12/31. But like I said, if we hear from from folks saying if or but that one day we'd be covered, we're open to hearing that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Garnica, would you like to speak? Unmute yourself.
Yes, hello. Hi, this is Jimena Garnica. Thanks, Charles and Charlie and Assemblymember Glick for always the support towards the artists in New York State and in New York City. This is a very important piece of legislation. I do have more of like a nuanced question about live work usage. I know that there is a 49-51% of allowed space, and for some artists like choreographers or theater directors, this is a little bit complicated because it's more than that for working. We need larger spaces for working, and that becomes an issue. Also, there is something in the home users that has to do with how many students one can have, and it's limited to 4. I know this bill won't address that. This, I believe, is, I don't know where this can be addressed, but it's part of that legislation, and I'm just wondering how can that be tackled. And then I just want to make a comment about the artist certification. I've been advocating a lot for the past 2 years for funding for this from the city and the state for art workers. And one of the things that we have found is that a registry is very important, and we have been getting pushback from the city. And it is important because artists need to be counted so that we can advocate for ourselves. We don't need to be certified, but we need to be counted. So there has to be, of course, a way that is not requiring institutional validation, and yet a way that we can say, yes, we're artists. So I just wanted to voice that and see how we can work with DCLA to revamp that program, or to see how we can all work towards a registry so that we can recount and advocate for ourselves. Thanks.
Thank you. And maybe we can talk offline about your first question.
Thank you.
Amit Solomon.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Hi, thank you for letting me speak. So first, we applaud Assemblymember Glick and her staff for standing strong with our community and for willing to go into the details of this matter and offer this resolution. I will say the biggest omission of the rezoning is that it legalized everything except for the existing residents. And what this bill does very neatly is it basically makes everyone who lives here legal. So that's really crucial. So I applaud Charlie, what you've done here. And I think the most important thing to know that it is permanent because it applies at the unit level. So we think it's an excellent bill. It should be wholeheartedly supported. There's still many more problems with the rezoning and the ULURP need to be fixed, but this is a major step in resolving the issue. So many thanks to you, and this really is fantastic. Thank you.
Right, thank you, Amit. Susan Stoltz.
Yes, I just like to have the distinction between loft tenants that are covered under the loft law and this law, and how people that may not have their full C of O's, how that would be covered, or are they covered by both, or two different ways that could be explained more. And I really thank Deborah Glick and everybody working on this. It's really important.
I think we would need to get a little more clarification to get back to you on the interplay, because they are they're two tracks that run independently from one another. So I'm not perfectly clear if this would affect, I don't believe, but I wouldn't want to say without knowing 100% that this would affect folks covered by the loft law in 7C.
My main thing is if people are not in the grandfathering, does it start with people having to have C of O's, or if they're in the process? And they're the JLWQA. So that's
the language of the bill says you either have a temporary or permanent C of O, or that you've applied for the C of O before 12/31/21.
Okay, so it should cover people that are loft tenants
in the process, right?
Okay, thank you. Katerina Royati. Unmute yourself.
Hi, actually, the person that asked the last question in a way asked what myself and Robert Rabascio is here with me wanted to ask.
Okay.
We live in a building that is at the very end of the TCO process, but at this point we cannot complete it because of the fact that the units are required to show certification. So it's exactly the same question. Essentially, our plans have been approved by the building department in full for all the units. Everything is in at the building department, and of course, we want a big grandfather. We would like to thank Deborah Glick and the staff for this law that really does address the issues at the core and is, of course, very important, and we all appreciate it very much.
Great. And finally, Dino Turovic. Unmute yourself.
Yeah. Yes, hi. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes, hi. I just want to echo what Amit and some previous speakers says. I really commend the Assemblymember Glick and her staff for this bill that corrects great injustice, I think, or attempts to make a great injustice, and doing that in a very elegant way, and I think a right way. So I just want to express support. I happen to be a president of the board of a building, 15 units building in Noho. And while I can't speak on behalf of the building, we haven't voted on this, I know the sentiment. I mean, it's a very mixed building, it consists of, my wife is an artist, I'm not. There are people who have, moved that in last 10 years who are not artists, but there are also some people who are artists. Everybody's unanimously, looking for something like this. So I think, that, just based on that, I would assume that the entire neighborhood is very strongly, if they understand this bill correctly, as I think I do now, I think they will be very supportive of this. So, again, thanks on behalf of our building. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Just want to give any of the other representatives of the electives an opportunity to say anything if they have any interest. Tevin, Ian, Nicole. All right, I think then, Josh, we can turn off the timer. Thank you. Let's go back to our usual view. Great, thank you. Okay, so again, Charlie, Assemblymember Glick, thank you so much for what you're doing with respect to this bill. I want to talk, we will do a resolution subject to the discussion with the committee after this. But if we do a resolution that approves, that recommends approval of this bill and that lays out all the areas of concern that you heard tonight with respect to future legislation, is that an adequate resolution to your way of thinking? Charles?
Yeah,
I can't.
I think so.
Charlie, what do you think?
Yes, I agree. I think as you know, if we have an understanding of what some of the main concerns of the community is, that's good.
Okay. All right. Well, thanks again for coming.
Of course.
And thanks to the over 100 people who came from the public. Thanks for all your questions and for all your participation. And as I said at the beginning, now's the time for the committee members to speak to one another. But you know how to reach us when you have to. And thanks for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Okay. So committee, does that plan of a reso sound good to you?
Yeah.
Any?
Yeah.
I don't see any hands raised. Michael.
Yes, that sounds like an excellent idea, that we are recommending approval by the state legislature of this proposal, the proposed legislation by Assemblymember Glick and a Senate sponsor. I think it makes sense, but I'm concerned about what would happen in the future. From the date forward, any occupant would not automatically qualify and would still have to be a certified artist. And I'm just wondering, where is the equity there? It's very important for us to maintain the affordable housing units for the artists who are currently occupying them. But I think we also have to look toward the future and say, what would the impact be on the future for artists who choose to live in this area? They would not be able to take advantage of this legislation. I think that might want to go in the resolution as a concern for future consideration.
Okay, so I was trying to keep an eye on the chat and keep an eye on, and I did not take that meaning from it. I thought that if they emphasize that this covers the units, so future residents of the units would be protected also. That was the kicking down the road can that he said they were not doing. Did I misunderstand?
No, but if other units who are not currently occupied would never be able to be occupied unless they were certified by artists. That's the point I'm making. There may be other spaces in the buildings that were never occupied by artists that might want to be eligible in the future. I'm just wondering how that would work here.
So you're saying you want to expand the joint live work inventory?
Yes, I'm just saying we might want to consider that for the future.
All right, would you send that in to me in a form that I can put in the reso?
Right.
Thanks. Thanks. Donna, unmute yourself.
So I'm just wondering, there were a lot of things that Charlie said he would get back to us with the questions on some answers and clarity and things like that. And do we want to get some of those answers, see if they refine this at all based on some of the questions that were asked before going ahead and writing a reso? I mean, and support the effort. I'm thrilled that Deborah's doing this, but this is the very beginning and they just got a lot of questions and feedback. So I'm wondering, if they want to answer some of those before we go ahead and write the reso.
Well, we have to, they need this as soon as possible because when the legislature closes on June 2nd. So I don't think we have another month to deal with it, but I think we could pose the questions, and it's not going to be part of this legislation anyway. So we shouldn't take anything for granted, but I would hate to see us wait another month.
Still gets us in before. Okay.
Yeah.
Just a thought. I mean, I just think there were a lot of things that were raised in it that
Mhm.
would be nice to have answers to see if they refine the bill at all.
It didn't sound like they were going to do too much. And and it seemed to me also that once you start to expand the purview of the bill, it would just, where would you stop? So that's just my opinion. Susan? Unmute.
No, I did. Thank you. I mean, I agree completely, really, with Donna, and I don't see the problem in waiting a month. I think that this is brand new. This is the first conversation we've had. This is the first chance the community has to give Deborah and give us any input. And I think it's important to listen and let her hear everything and come back to it next month. I mean, clearly we are all 100% in support and thankful and want this in spirit, but it just seems like it's not something I would think we would need to do tonight. I think it's time, we're listening.
All right, I noticed that Alexander Neratov made the point in the chat, Michael, that your concern was a New York city concern, not a New York state concern. Did you notice that in the chat?
No, I didn't see that.
Yeah, take a look at that. I just saw it fly by.
Well,
Sean?
okay.
Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I think, is he making reference to the definition in the zoning resolution or how it's being
And you
handled?
brought up about future artists, but please check for yourself. I could be wrong.
Okay.
Thanks. Sean, unmute.
Yeah, did you, Frederica, you said June 2nd was the deadline, was the end of the session? Was it June
Yes.
2nd? Well, that's why we have to address this month, because if we address it in May, it won't pass the full board until when? May 20th? That's on, and then is Memorial Day weekend. I think
This
this
has
is,
to get through the committee and the housing committee. And believe me, this is such a niche bill that I'm sure most of the housing committee for the state has no idea what these issues are. So the more ammunition we give them to make it important to the committee, I think the better the better the result.
so what's the reason for postponing it a month? It seems perfect now. How can we improve on perfection in a month?
Does anyone want to answer, Sean? Okay, Bo, hey there.
Yeah, I think it's very, very important that the committee passes this resolution tonight. And remember, this is a very simple bill, which is good, because then when Glick staff goes to their colleagues, it's simple. It's a very simple thing. And I think it will give them momentum. I think it would give them support that they need now. And I think that if, it's a slippery slope if we get into various caveats and other concerns, because you'll never cover all of them. We all know how complicated this issue is. And then there might be a tendency to think, well, if it wasn't covered, then we didn't really have that as an intended change. In other words, if you include in this bill a list of other things, I think it would be detrimental to the.
You mean in the reso? You mean in the reso or in the bill?
Yeah, I'm sorry, in the resolution. So therefore, I think we should keep it very simple, pass this, support this very simple bill, something that can very simply be explained to the legislators, and keep it at that. And then later on, there are other avenues in which we can make this thing more specific, because we know there are a lot of fixes that are needed. But right now, we need to pass this bill ASAP, in my opinion.
Okay.
I mean, this resolution, I'm sorry, resolution. Sorry.
Katie?
Aha, you can hear me.
Aha, you can hear me.
Feedback. I do want us to keep track of all the questions. I'm not disagreeing with Bo and Sean, but we did have some questions that we want to address. So how are we going to keep track of those questions for the future?
Well, when you say the questions, you mean the things that they said that they'd get back to us on?
Yes.
Well, I made some notes on that, and we have a recording, and which we can refer to after. And my opinion was that the things that they were going to get back to us on were not specific to this bill the way they want it now, but specific to more relevant to future legislation. That's my feeling. I'd like to hear from other people. Is there any further comment? All right, then.
Yeah, I'll say something. Can you hear me all right?
Sure, Anita.
I totally agree with Bo. I think we should keep it really simple. There's something beautiful about how simple the bill is. I can understand it. I don't have to do more research. I think they should hear from us that they have our support and not, we've had so much complexity, and this one is sort of a clean thought. So I support that we pass a resolution to approve it, to support it.
Thank you. Anybody else want to say anything?
Does anyone from the community board, from the community listening, think that we should postpone it for another month?
Well,
I didn't hear anyone say that. The community wants this. We're a community board.
If we postpone it, we might as well not do it.
Let me finish. Give the community what it wants, and the community wants this passed ASAP.
Hey, Carter. Carter, you had a very exciting afternoon, didn't you?
Well, I just was walking down the street. I think Sean brings up a point. Of course, everybody wants a solution. That's what we did not get from the city for the existing residents. And that was the problem. And this, first of all, I want to thank Deborah for listening and accepting the challenge that was put on her of resolving what the city could not do. Which was address the people who actually live here in the community. And I think the big question is, and we keep hearing the various versions of this, is does this resolve my own issue for the residents here? And that's the question that people have, and it's not clear. That, most of the questions that were fielded tonight were about that. And I agree that, slowing this down to hear answers is perhaps not the best approach, but that's the public itself isn't educated on many of their own situations and clamoring for a solution. And we don't even know, this seems to be a solution for many people, but there's also other issues as well. And so that's where I think when we heard it's not the only issue. Some people want to be certified. Some people want to be, perhaps some people want to convert. Who knows? Everybody has their own needs, but this wasn't put in a great context. It was just sort of solving it for everybody. And I think that's what people want to hear the answer to. So I'm not saying we slow it down and not support it, but it's not framed, all that well. And this is the first step, even though the zoning is a city issue, that the state is resolving it. And fortunately, we have a assembly member who's really in touch with our community here and working on resolving this issue. And so I'm just not quite, for me, I just want to know more about, is this for everybody? There's a lot of open questions about rent regulated units. We've heard conflicting information throughout this process. Many of I've asked over and over again about, once a unit is regulated, what is its status? Many of the C of Os have specific notations. So I just putting out there again, people want to know answers about themselves and their own situation. And, we don't have enough context for that. And that's the best way for us to get feedback from people, is if they know if this resolves their issue. And so this was people's first time hearing about it.
Carter, I'm going to interrupt you for just one sec. Charlie is still on the call. Charlie, are you there?
No, I think he left.
Hang on.
Charlie or Charles?
Sorry.
No, sure. So, based on what you've heard tonight, do you envision any changes in the language of the bill?
I can't necessarily say. I'm not sure. I think that what we'll do is we've made notes about the questions that people have. We've heard the questions about the co-ops. We've heard the questions about the status of renters. Should those questions lead to any revelation about the legislation, we can then have that discussion about any changes, but I can't say at the moment if we envision changes because those are still open questions for us.
Okay.
So we'll go down that road and then we can
All right.
I'm looking at that.
I was just going to say so Frederica, that in the end, what I'm saying is I agree we should support the bill, but we also want to hear about the answers to these questions so that the people in the community can hear the answers. So I'm suggesting that we've convened people in this forum. What's the next forum that they can find out about it? And that's more my point. And we've heard this over and over. What's my situation? And it's always this constant confusion. So that's my concern, is that there's a forum for people to come back and hear if this resolves their issue.
And I agree with that.
Well, the forum tonight, read the forum, Carter, in the chat. Please pass so we can continue. Folks are asking that CB support the effort. I think it's important we pass it tonight. This is what the community wants. Read the chat.
No,
Did you hear what I said, Sean? I agreed with you.
Yeah,
So,
and I agree with both of you.
But no one from the community wants to postpone this.
I don't think Carter is suggesting that we postpone it. Carter said, what's the next forum for discussing this? And I want to give you a little bit of background on a couple of things, bring you up to date, and then that will influence our next step. A while ago, I suggested writing to the mayor and the, what was it now? It's been so long. Maybe it was the Melanie LaRocca or the chief efficiency officer, regarding the fact that the city has a rezoning commitments tracker that hadn't been updated since maybe 2019. And at the same time, we were discussing in the executive meeting about reminding them of the commitment that the city made after the rezoning to add staff to the loft board. And there was some sentiment for thinking about that before doing anything. Since then, the city has updated the commitments tracker. All of the notes from the commitment letter that Vicky Bean sent were included, and so it's now on the tracker and a matter of public record. We just got a new executive director of the loft board. And if you recall, a few years ago, we had the executive director of the loft board. And since then, they've had a revolving door of executive directors. And any of our requests for any information or clarification, they just have not been come to our meetings. There's just been nothing. So I thought that we should give the new executive director a couple months to get into her job, and then we could have her come back. And at that point, perhaps with her there, and perhaps with other people, that would be an opportunity to continue to talk about joint live work and to talk about conversions and the rest of it. So I wondered, any sentiment for that, or does that answer anybody's concerns? Janine, I see you have your hand up. Unmute.
I just want to say I agree with what the committee is saying. We wrote an extensive resolution against the Soho NoHo resolution, citing the Soho NoHo Chinatown rezoning, citing many flaws. And this legislation only addresses one, and so we can't solve everything with one piece of legislation. It's wonderful that our assembly member and our senator are going to be moving forward with this. So, some of the issues that Carter raised about certified artists and conversion are city issues, and we have follow-up questions. And I think we just need to keep this on the burner in terms of, updates with our community. So whether, when it makes the most sense, whether it's a May meeting or June or whatever the case may be, we need to continue to provide meaningful discussions when it makes the most sense. That's all. And we should pass this resolution.
Right. Well, so you make a good point, Janine, that we don't want to be listing scenarios that really that are not appropriate to the state, or a bit, or that are appropriate to the city for a bill about the state. So when we write that up, we'll have to keep an eye on that. So is there any further, David, do you have anything to say? John Paul?
I always have things to say, but I'm listening to
Okay,
this.
fine, good.
And you don't have to call on me if I don't raise my hand. It's okay.
All right, well, sorry.
Yeah, I will
John?
just do the thing I've been saying more recently, and that's just try to have the most abbreviated resolution possible. It sounds like we all support this. I'd like to have an emphatic, we support this, without listing off everything. If we want to invite conversations or the public for further conversations, we can point them there in the resolution. So I would just, I just want to applaud Assemblywoman Glick. I generally don't trust how these things end up being put together, but she's engendered, at least with me, a level of trust and belief in how she'd operate and have the community's interest in mind. And so just kudos to that. It's unlike many city council people who, and former city council people who really don't step up. She really has. And Charlie, you're working for a great assembly person, and I'm just really impressed. I just support it and do it briefly, more briefly than even I've just spoken. Thank you.
Okay, so we have Donna.
I just want to second what John Paul just said. Just write something very simple supporting the bill and kind of leave it short and simple.
Thank you. So let's make it formal and take a vote. By vote of the committee, well, could I hear a motion to recommend approval of this bill?
I'll do that.
Thanks,
Second.
David.
Second.
Okay, thanks. All in favor? Just use your hands.
Aye.
Sean, do I see your hand? Okay, very good. It's approved unanimously. And we will be keeping an eye on the loft board issue and this issue. And thank you all for your participation. Does anyone have new business or anything else? Okay, and thank you very much to Josh for staying on the call tonight and helping out.
Yes, thank you. Thank you,
Okay.
Frederica.
Okay, thanks to all.
Thank you, Charlie.
Good
Thanks,
night.
Frederica.
Good night.
Thank you, everyone.
Good night.